Hey, if you're like me, sometimes you can't always explain where your mind goes or the mindset you have in a particular day. But today, there are thousands of explanations as to where our mind is going because today's the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks in New York City. And there were thousands and thousands of people affected who lost their lives, who are still affected today. And the residuals from that 20 years later are pretty obvious from a military standpoint. We have people out serving our country, protecting us, defending us, and that should never just take one day out of the year to take time to reflect on that. We should always be cognizant of that. But today, it's at the front of all of our minds that the anniversary 20-year anniversaries today of 9/11. So our hearts and prayers go out to those families who've lost people, the soldiers who continually live with the effects of that. But today I've got a military uh, veteran who is making it big time in corporate America as a leader and is a father of three. He's married. But I want to go into Aaron Paulsgrove's background is very impressive, very remarkable. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1999 with a degree in Russian and earned an MBA years later, but served in leadership as an officer in the Army from 99 to '05. He was in combat. He was in during peacetime in combat. He got his MBA in 2011, like I say, from Wake Forest School of Business. Those are great education institutions, and he has worked for large corporations. He was the chairman and CEO of Coca-Cola Consolidated. He is now, I believe, the senior vice president within the Bank of America's Global Human Resources. So I'm going to let him talk a little more about himself, but formally welcome Aaron Paulsgrove.
Thanks, John, and thanks for having me. And just one correction there, I worked for the chairman and CEO
I
of
got you.
Coca-Cola Consolidated.
Okay.
But man, what an honor and a privilege, to be with you on this significant day to talk a little bit. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything about your military experience, since this series is called Behind the Shield, honoring people like yourself? Anything about your military experience that you can say? I'm sure there's plenty, but some that stand out to you as far as some of the characteristics and the ways it shaped you into some of your leadership now in corporate America.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think, primarily just as a person, I think as a result of my experience as a veteran and as an Army officer, I feel like I've just got a much greater appreciation for the freedoms that we all enjoy, and just the simple joys in life, like spending time with family and spending time outside. I love to hunt. I love to camp. I love to, you know, be in the woods. And I think my experience also, and maybe we'll get into that a little later, but it really strengthened my faith and my trust in God, and my belief in the power of prayer.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I can only imagine just some of the disciplines that sort of either shaped or refined you as a person that absolutely translate into your roles in the business world. And I have to ask everybody, and especially you. You've got the privilege of today's interview being the guest on 9/11. So you remember where you were on 9/11. Can you talk about some of the
Yeah.
emotions attached to what you saw or felt that day and just kind of some context around where you were 20 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you asking me that question. And, only because I think it does us all good to talk about that. I mean, every American who was, alive that day remembers where they were on 9/11, because for most of us, it was a day we'll never forget. On 20 September 11s ago, I was actually with General Lloyd Austin, who's currently serving as our Secretary of Defense.
Mm.
But at that time, he was a brigadier general. He was the acting commander for the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, where I was stationed. And I was working as his aide de camp. And he was in a closed door meeting with 3 other senior leaders, me, his admin, his enlisted aide and driver. We had just watched the second plane hit the South Tower on a TV we had there in his office. And then the guys from the SCIF showed up. The SCIF is where all the top secret intelligence is collected. They showed up with a black briefcase handcuffed to one of the guy's wrists. And he
like
said,
a movie
"Sir,
almost."
Yeah, it was. He said, "Sir, there's been an emergency and we need to brief the general." And I said, "Well, he's in a meeting." And they said, "Well, you need to interrupt him." And I had never before interrupted General Austin when he was in a closed door meeting, but I knocked on the door and opened it up. And I'll never forget, the look on his face. He was surprised, that I'd actually just walked in his office. And I said, "Sir, the country's under attack. 2 hijacked planes just hit the World Trade Center. Another one just hit the Pentagon. And we believe a 4th is on the way to the Capitol. And the guys from the SCIF are here to brief you." He said, "Okay." And then, the guys got up and left the meeting, and that was that. So, yeah,
Wow.
pretty momentous day. And literally, within hours, we had infantrymen, manning machine guns at every entrance to the base. Checking IDs, checking every vehicle. I mean, before then, anybody could just drive on the base, but we locked that place down. And I lived about a mile off post. And the next day I couldn't even get into work. The line of traffic was so long trying to get in. I literally turned my car around, went back home, got my bike, and rode my bike into the office. And,
Wow.
So anyways,
Wow.
yeah, it certainly changed life for all of us.
Well, I'm going to assume you weren't invited to be a part of that meeting that they were having once you interrupted him. I'm assuming you weren't invited to have a seat at the table in that one.
So yeah, I was not at that meeting, but about a month and a half later, I accompanied General Austin to another secret meeting in Kuwait. And that was where the initial planning began for the invasion of Iraq. And so this is literally just 2 months, after 9/11. Special forces had just dropped into Afghanistan. But after that meeting, he looked at me and he called me Rocky, because that was the division mascot's name. He was a mascot bulldog called Rocky, dates back to World War I. But anyways, he looked at me and said, "Rocky, this time next year we'll be in Baghdad." And he was not wrong.
Yeah. Wow. What a great story. What a memory that you have. 20 years later, you can recount it. And I bet you can just see it like it was 5 minutes ago. Like when you start to talk about that, it probably seems pretty recent memory for you, even 20 years later or so. But man, so can you maybe describe what you would say the country looks like? How's it different now? There's so many ways to go with that question. But really from your standpoint, from being involved in like those early planning stages of us invading our enemy, to now, like, how does the country look different from just organically here in the homeland? What have you seen evolve?
John, I think the starkest contrast between America today versus America, the day of and the day after 9/11, the thing that really strikes me is just the lack of unity in our country today. I remember on September 12th, the day after 9/11, Americans were united in our grief and our shock over what had happened. We were all angry and we all shared the same desire to strike back at the enemy. And it didn't matter what color you were, what religion you were, what political party you were. We were all just Americans on that day. Everyone was flying the stars and stripes from their cars, their houses. You couldn't find an American flag to purchase anywhere because they were all sold out. And there was just this incredible sense of camaraderie and brotherly love for your fellow American. And people were also scared in trying to find meaning, in the tragedy. And in the following Sunday, you know, I remember everybody was in church, and for several Sundays following, right? I mean, every church parking lot, every church pew across America, you know, was full to overflowing. And,
Yeah.
you know, when I look at America today, you know, we're a long way off from that. I mean, I think maybe with the exception of the Civil War, it's hard to think of another time in history when we've been more divided as a nation. And just pick an issue. I mean, we're divided over race and politics and vaccines and masks. I mean, you name it. And we're angry at our fellow Americans, and just the you know, the division in our country today, in my mind, is the starkest contrast between, you know, the country that emerged, you know, the days, you know, following 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because the level that we felt galvanized that day after to now, it almost feels like we're naked and susceptible and really weakened almost just at our core from a unity standpoint. So it feels like we've kind of started to unravel. And granted, it's been over the, you know, it's been over the last few years, 10 years even maybe, but it feels at its pinnacle right now. And I know, being, I can't speak for you or other veterans, but I can only imagine that the reason that you go and fight for all of us is to maintain our levels of unity and freedom and security, right? And to see us sort of unravel from within's got to be disappointing. But so let's go back to the beginning a little bit before, you know, what what made you make the decision to join the military and to serve?
Yeah. You know, everybody has their own reasons, their different reasons, you know, for serving. I mean, for me, you know, I mean, for I know a lot of Americans who served post 9/11, that was the catalyst, you know, that motivated them to serve. But you know, I signed up, you know, during peacetime, and I really believe that, or feel that God called me at a young age, to serve. I mean, I remember when I was about 10 years old, I knew that I wanted to serve in the military. I was probably also motivated by my grandfather, who I was very close to growing up. He fought as an Army infantryman in World War II, in the Korean War, and 2 tours in Vietnam. And I just, you know, remember being really inspired, you know, by his stories of service. And I was a little older. I had an uncle who was an Army Ranger I really looked up to. And he's the one that told me about West Point. And that was probably the conversation that set me on the path to, you know, eventually going to West Point and becoming an officer.
Yeah, no, that's good. There's a pedigree there, it sounds like. And I mean, I will give a shout out. My dad is no longer with us, but you know, he served in Vietnam and was a captain. And I have his dog tags hanging behind me, and I've got his silver star here with me. You know,
Wow.
so
Wow.
it's a pretty nice reminder, even as far back as Vietnam, just to know that those people that are out there that served and helped us maintain what we see today, like you said, what we take for granted a lot of times, in the little abilities we can to just walk across the street. I would imagine there's some folks in Afghanistan that would love to be able to just walk out on their front patio with a cup of coffee and say hello,
Right.
good morning to their neighbor, right?
Amen to
So I
that.
think, you know, and it sounds like you were a believer early on in your, you know, before the military, at least in your teenage formative years. I'm assuming, based on that story. Talk about some of your challenges. You know, even it doesn't have to be limited to military, but you know, I would assume it's not an always smooth road as a Christian, as a believer in certain environments within the military. But talk about, as you started to become in that, you know, your older teenage years and get into the military, and your faith. Did you have any challenges? What struggles or obstacles, or what solidified it, even, if you will?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the you know, the title of your show is The Shield of Faith, right? And, you know, if I think back, I mean, you know, I became a believer at a very young age, you know, and fortunately had some really great godly role models and influences on my life early on. Not to say that, you know, everything in my early years was, you know, was perfect, certainly not. But, you know, I entered the military with a really strong belief in the Lord, you know, in commitment to following Jesus. But there were really two early challenges to my faith in the military. And the first one, was probably near the end of Ranger School, which, it's the Army's toughest course. They teach small unit tactics and leadership skills to those of us whose mission it is to engage the enemy in close combat. And Ranger School it's mentally and physically challenging. And for 62 days, we train to exhaustion, and we push the limits of our minds and our bodies. Well, it's a 62-day course, but I reached my limit on day 59 during the final phase of Ranger School, which is in the Florida swamps. And I was tired, I was cold, I was out of food, and was really feeling sorry for myself. And I remember lying there on the ground, pulling security next to this river, where we were waiting for some boats to come pick us up for the next mission, and thinking to myself, there is no way that I'm going to make it another 3 days without food, because there was no more resupply until the end of the course. And I remember just saying a little prayer and asking God for a miracle. And I heard that unmistakable, still small voice say to me, I have not brought you this far for you to fail. And that was it. It was in that moment that I knew the Lord was with me. I could feel his presence, and I just started to cry. I mean, like a baby. And my Ranger buddy who was next to me, he knew I was out of food, and he tried to console me, and he was like, hey man, it's okay, don't cry, but I was like, no man, the Lord just spoke to me. I mean, I heard his voice. He told me I'm going to make it to the end.
Yeah,
and,
these are tears of joy. These are tears of joy and hope.
Absolutely, man. And so the two of us, just right there, man, we started to rejoice and had a little quiet, worship session together right there in the mud. And man, for the next 3 days, I humped across probably 20 to 30 miles of swamp with 80 pounds of gear on my back, expending who knows how many thousands of calories, but, not a single morsel of food. And literally by the grace of God, I graduated Ranger School and earned my Ranger tab.
Wow. I mean, that's got to rank right up there, not only in top encounters spiritually that you had with God, but that's got to rank right up there with one of the most rewarding moments too. And maybe you could go into a couple more if you had any, but that right there, that story stands out to me because it was so many different confirmations within you. I mean, it was confirmation in your faith that God really does care and reach down and touch a person right in the middle of the situation they're in, right? And really does care about you specifically. It gave you hope for the resilience within yourself, knowing that you had a little more left in the tank when you didn't think you did. And the reason I say all that is because for that person listening right now that really does feel like, man, you hear about rock bottom all the time, and maybe they feel like they've even gone past that point of no return. I mean, I feel like as you pressed in to God in that moment, like that was your reflex, was to start praying in that moment, right? And to seek him beyond yourself. And so that's for somebody out there that maybe thinks they've given all they can give. Well, there's a God that cares about you specifically, just like he did with Aaron in that moment, and can pull you up out of that. So I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, I've got another test that might encourage, somebody who's listening as well. And, everybody has tests, right? I mean, I heard our wise person say, once, we're all either just, we're all either coming out of a test or getting ready to go into a test, or in the middle of a test. So, I think probably my second big test of faith probably came about 3 years after that. So this would have been early April 2003. I was a captain at that point in the 3rd Infantry Division, and we were about 19 days into the invasion of Iraq. I was in charge of about 40 soldiers. We had 23 vehicles, and we were lined up in a convoy, waiting on our next mission, right on the outskirts of Baghdad, when a missile came in and destroyed our tactical operations center and killed about 6 soldiers, wounded about 20 others. Shortly after that, we received orders to move north and resupply our units that were almost out of ammo and fuel. En route, we were ambushed. We lost 2 more soldiers, Sergeant First Class John Marshall and Staff Sergeant Robert Stevers. They were blown to pieces literally right in front of me. And over the next 6 to 8 hours or so, I would eventually lose 5 of my vehicles to RPG fire, and about a dozen of our guys were wounded by shrapnel or gunfire. But we completed our mission. We held our ground, and about 2 days later, the enemy literally disappeared, and we were in charge of Baghdad and the country. But it was during the heat of that battle, when I looked around me and just all the death and the destruction, and I'll spare you the gory details, but
right.
I mean, literally there were, many more wounded enemy lying around us in just different states. And, just listening to some of them crying out for help. I mean, just, I felt like God abandoned us, like he'd abandoned humanity. And I was angry at God for several weeks and months after that. And I quit praying. I quit reading my Bible. I was just trying to process, what I had witnessed and trying to square it up with my faith. And it really wasn't until about a year later, after I'd come home, and I still wasn't in a great place mentally or spiritually, but I was back in church, and it was during one of those services that our pastor was preaching on this verse in First Kings where Solomon said, the Lord said that he would dwell in a dark cloud. And then he quoted a verse from Psalm 139 that says, indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and light are both alike to you. It's basically saying that the Lord was with us in the darkest moments of our life. And when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, literally, he is right there with us. And it was in that moment, I'm sitting in church in that moment, and the Lord reminded me of the footprints in the sand poem. And if you have ever seen
where
that,
the writer,
he's
carrying you. Yeah.
He looks back, on his life, and he sees two sets of footprints. But during the most difficult, parts of his life, there was only one set of footprints. And, that troubles him. He asks the Lord, why, during the most difficult parts of my life, when I needed you most, did you leave me? And the Lord says, my precious child, when you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. And the Lord reminded me in that moment that he carried me through that experience. We lost several good men that day. Dozens were wounded. But I didn't even get a scratch, John. And he reminded me, I literally had 2 RPGs that came sliding right up to me, and they never exploded. And it was just in that moment, in church, sitting in the pew, when the Lord brings all this back to my remembrance, and just, he healed me, he restored me. And, so.
Wow. Those stories, man, those are priceless. And that is a good, I would say, contrast to the first story, because it felt to you like he had abandoned you even not long before you knew he had shown up, right? You had evidence that he had shown up in your darkest moment. And then the next darkest moment, because this is like us, everybody does this. We have revisionist history. We forget how God showed up a month ago. Whenever we're in the middle of this pit right now, where is he? Right? We're frustrated. We're mad. So I think that was a good moment of transparency that you were real about saying, you were mad at God. You were disappointed that he had left and didn't show up and come in and save the day. But, I think we have a lot of Christians out there right now, especially with what we're dealing with in society today. Like, I think they feel like God just kind of packed up and moved out. If you look around, there's really more evidence of evil because we're looking for it, right? I mean, there's probably a lot more good than we're not seeing because of how, the lens we're looking through, but there's a lot more evil today than it feels like there ever has been. So I think a lot of Christians too are questioning, where did he go? But he never leaves. He knows before it happens. Like, he's not surprised by anything. So I think he's calling the church to rise up, I believe. I mean, he's given us all the tools. He's equipped us to stand up and fight. But again, can't do it we can't do it if we're divided, and I feel like we're divided in the church just like we are in the streets.
Yeah.
So, man, I think I touched on it a minute ago or earlier in the conversation, but what about you specifically? Qualities, attributes, things that, because you definitely are in leadership and high level executive leadership has a little bit of your pedigree and track record in corporate America. So what about you has from a standpoint of faith? Because I imagine it's not easy in corporate America. I mean, I live it every day. It's not every, not all of my teammates are Christians, trust me. So how does that factor in your everyday life? And what about you allows you to sort of press through some of that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, there have certainly, been some challenging moments when, I felt like, my faith was not necessarily being challenged, but questioning, can I live out my faith in the workplace in an authentic, real way?
Right.
Without offending someone, or without, crossing some politically correct, boundary. And, and I wish I could say that I have found the magic bullet. But, every situation is different. And, I've just, come to rest in the fact that I feel like God has me where he wants me for this time and for this season, because everything is a season. And it's really just, my place right now to just love people, not judge them, because it's tempting to judge people, but,
right.
Really just to love people where they're at, and to show them Jesus. And if I have the opportunity, to talk about him, I can, but to really just, be the person that God's called me to be, lead the people that he's called me to lead, do the work that he's given me to do. And then kind of leave the rest to him to figure out, because he's a lot smarter than I am.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, you've got children, I've got 4 kids. And so it's easier to live an example, right? They say that, more things are caught than taught sometimes when in parenting. I believe it translates to the work environment too, because I believe, could we as Christians walk in and, beat everybody over the head with the Bible? Of course we could. And that wins very few people, I will say, especially the ones that are wanting to poke holes in faith in general. I think that does that more than anything, it deflects them and repels them. But I think what you're saying too is just living it out. Like, we can live the gospel, more than we have to talk about the gospel. We can live it. And you're talking about loving people, not judging them, operating in character and integrity in your business dealings, personally. So there's different ways to have an impact. And that's for somebody listening that feels like maybe they're falling short because they're a Christian, but they're not going to work every day, putting scripture sticky notes on everybody's cubicle. So they feel like they're not a spiritual enough, or, they're not strong enough of an evangelist. And I'm here to tell you, based on kind of what you said too, is they can see it. There's a magnetism to the way we live it. And the people will seek you out because they know you pray, or when they're going through a struggle, you'll have an opportunity. God will present those divine appointments. And so, if we get into a little bit of talking to yourself, some here, I want to have Aaron Polsgrove give himself some advice, the younger version of you. So you're getting ready to go into the military. Anything you would say to yourself as you get ready to embark on this, right? You've graduated from a high level institution academically, right? So you're going in to serve. What would you say to yourself? Any answers to the test you wish you would have had going into it?
Yeah. I think 2 things. First, I would say, you're not as hot as you think you are.
Yeah.
I think, as a younger person, I was really, impressed with myself. And yeah, just, you're not as hot as you think you are, because there's always somebody better.
Yeah.
And 2, I would say to myself, love people more and judge people less. I wish I'd done more of that as a younger person.
Wow. Yeah. Did you have any situations that you could have handled? I don't know when I word it that way, but everybody's got a situation they can handle different. But so in the military, in leadership, I guess take us back to that point where you were getting angry with God and you were under that fire that time, and you just sort of stopped reading your Bible, stopped praying. If you could have stepped into that moment and talked to yourself, now, right, looking back, what would you have said to maybe keep that guy more grounded, more steady, going forward, resilience in his faith. What would you say to that guy in that moment?
You know, I think I knew the answer. And and people, you may be surprised, like, why would you be impacted that way by that experience? I mean, that's what you signed up to do. That's what you trained for and prepared for. But I don't know that anything can truly prepare you, for your first baptism of fire. And for me, that's what that experience was. And so, and what I saw and experienced challenged my faith, and just the level of just evil, that men can inflict on one another. And I use that term generically, right? Mankind. And that was really my first taste of that. And trying to square that up with my faith as a, young, early, mid 20-year-old, leader, it was not easy initially. But all of the answers were right there in front of me in the scriptures that I read. I may not have truly understood some of them, but they were there. And God is clear from the beginning that He's God, we're not. And I think, and this is a piece of advice that, one of my mentors today, is fond of saying, and I wish I would have had that piece of advice as a young man. It's that you can trust an unknown future to a known God.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That might've made a difference in that moment. Yeah. And, so yeah, it happens in everyday life. I mean, you can be right in the middle of a combat zone, or you can be right in the middle of your home with chaos and strife going on. And I'm not comparing those two environments, but I am saying as people, we can literally sink into that pit of, hopelessness, where our faith is tested, or it wavers, or even we fail our faith sometimes. And we've just got to, in those moments, realize them. We've got to understand the triggers that knock us down a little bit, but we've got to build upon it and understand God is God, like you said, and get grounded again and get back up, and I think there's something to be said for not doing it alone as well. But do you have some mentors or some folks in your life now? We talked a little bit off air. Do you have some people now that you kind of utilize in that capacity when things get a little rocky?
Yeah, I do. And you just said something that I wanted to just reminded me of another important truth. I think that I've learned that I wish I would have known when I was younger. And that is that God's faithfulness is not dependent upon our faithfulness. He's always faithful. And I think as a young person, I always used to kind of feel like if I did something, God would do something right. And as long as I was living right, then God would do right by me. Well, I've made enough mistakes in my life now to know that is absolutely not the case. God is always good. He's always faithful, even when I'm not. But yeah, having, there's this concept that the military has, and it's actually a scriptural concept, but you never do anything alone. In Ranger School, we had a Ranger buddy that you never left. I mean, literally never left. The Navy has a similar concept with their shipmates and wingmen in the Air Force. And there's a great scripture, that says, a twofold cord, is strong, and a threefold cord is not easily broken. And just there is strength in numbers. And as men, I think oftentimes we fail to practice that concept. We feel like we've got to do stuff on our own. We've got to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps when we fail. And but we weren't designed to live that way. We were designed to live in fellowship with one another. And having other men in my life who I can reach out to when I'm struggling, or who will reach out to me when they're struggling. I mean, we strengthen one another. There's a group that I'm part of on Friday mornings, called Men of Honor, that for me has really provided, some of that strength and encouragement and fellowship. But yeah, we all need to be part of, a group, a brotherhood.
Yeah, for sure. And to just as you're talking, this hits me. One of the biggest oxymorons, I think, in American entertainment would be the Lone Ranger had Tonto. How much of a Lone Ranger
That's right.
really was he?
Right. Right.
Lone
Yeah.
Ranger even had Tonto.
That's
So,
right.
I like that point that you just made. I think that's crucial. And so I want to go a little bit in a different direction in this last question, this last topic we're going to hit as we close up shop here. And I'm going to adjust this question a little bit to more apply to today specifically. The original question was, what are the misconceptions do we as civilians have about the military or about being a soldier in combat or otherwise? You can answer that as well, but I want to have you specifically address the people out there that have been directly affected by 9/11 20 years ago, the families, even families of current military who are serving now, past military, people who are affected by it, veterans who still carry it mentally, even though that they weren't physically maybe wounded, but they're carrying this mental around, because we all know that suicide, I think I read it, killed four times many suicides than combat deaths, I think is the statistic, unless I've got that wrong. But I think, so talk to those people today, specifically in light of 9/11 20-year anniversary.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I read recently where 3 million Americans have served since 9/11. That's 3 million Americans who have, put their lives on the line for their fellow Americans, have gone and have come home. I think one of the common misconceptions that people have of veterans is that we're all wounded, that we're all fragile, shells of who we once were. And, military service is certainly challenging, but it's also very rewarding. And war is tough, and it sometimes exacts a high price. There's no denying that. But, very rarely are veterans as truly broken, I think, as some people think that we are. Many people, think about soldiers with PTSD and they envision the worst case scenario. But,
Yeah.
There are a few, veterans who do suffer from acute PTSD, but, the vast majority of service members, are functioning members of society, and do just fine, in transitioning out of the military, and, back into civilian life. But that's not to say, that, we don't all sometimes, think back on our service and wonder what was it all for. And I think especially in light of, what's recently happened in Afghanistan, I know that many veterans who serve there, are just dealing with lots of different emotions, as they watch those events unfold and, kind of questioning, what was it for,
Right.
and, without getting political, I think all of us can certainly feel a great sense of pride and accomplishment in what we did. It was we accomplished our mission. We in many cases, even if it was just for a period of time, we brought a level of peace and prosperity to those regions that had never existed before. We certainly prevented thousands and thousands of terrorists, from dying of old age.
Right. Right.
And, but I think more importantly, we've demonstrated, to the world that America, when tested, will come together. And from 1776 to 2021, Americans have always responded to that call. And we can look at today's society and today's generation, and every generation looks at the generations behind them, the younger generations, and shakes their head and wonders,
Right.
What the heck's going on. But make no mistake, every generation has answered the call when their nation has needed it. And I believe that will certainly be the case going forward. So I think Americans, both those who served and those who support and love those who served, certainly have a lot to be grateful for. And, I think our enemies would be hugely mistaken if they misinterpret, our departure from Afghanistan as a sign of weakness or lack of resolve or lack of commitment, to our allies. But, on a spiritual sense, in a bigger picture, again, God, as you said earlier, he is firmly seated on the throne. He is working all things, to an intended end. And while we may not fully understand how everything that's going on fits into the big picture. He certainly does. And he can be trusted both with our personal future, and the bigger future of what's happening in the world. And we don't need to walk around worried. If you're a believer, you don't have to walk around worried or fearful or concerned. We can have boldness in knowing that we can trust an unknown future to a known God.
Yeah. Amen. That's powerful. That's powerful, man. One last thing for you, because I appreciate that perspective, and that's talking to those people that are serving, encouraging that this is not for nothing. We know as believers and those listening, God doesn't waste anything. Nothing's
right.
wasted. So all the things we're doing in to honor him and to defend what he's given us to steward over, I believe nothing's wasted in that regard, regardless of what the White House is doing or what's happening right now. I think down the road, nothing's wasted. You have one thing that you can give us, just kind of as what's it going to take to galvanize us a little bit further back to maybe what it looked like 50 years ago as a country? What's it going to take to galvanize the American people again and bring us back together? Like you mentioned, we're very divided, and there's a lot of different arms and tentacles to that. But because I know it only is going to take one thing, and you have the secret sauce, so you can only give me one thing that it's going to take, right? What do you think? What's it going to take, though, in general?
Again, I think, every time America has been attacked, we've come together. That's just the truth, whether it was Pearl Harbor or 9/11. I think if anybody were to attack us, I think you would see Americans come together again very quickly and unite.
Yeah.
But as much as I love this country and thankful that I live here and I'm proud to have served this country, my loyalty is to a different country. And I'm following a different commander in chief, and his name is Jesus. And, and his army is the church, and the church spans the globe. I have more in common as a believer, with a woman, an African woman in a rural village somewhere who also loves Jesus. I have more in common with her, than I do another straight white guy like myself, who's an atheist or who doesn't love Jesus, and he may also be an American. I think God is doing a work right now in the church. I think there's been a testing, of the church. And I think, he's coming back soon.
Right.
And so frankly, I'm not really looking to see what God's going to do for our nation, but I'm looking to see what God is doing in his church. And I expect that, here before long, we're going to hear the trumpet call.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, about how you have more in common with that person in another continent in Africa than you do maybe with your neighbor right there down the street. I think that's a great way to look at it. I think more people need to look at it. And hopefully, as people, we get our finances in line and we start looking at them closer whenever it starts to get to be a grease fire in our bank account. Hopefully we don't have to wait till we get attacked again to galvanize again as people and to come together. Hopefully we can do it anyway, hopefully. And I know we don't have any evidence of that right now, but I hope it doesn't take another huge attack on our soil to bring us together. I hope we can figure this thing out before it becomes a grease fire again. So, man, go ahead.
I'll tell you what, Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. And the ground at the foot of the cross is level ground. This desire and demand in our country for equality and justice, those are good things to want and to go after. But the only place you are going to find true justice and true equality is at the foot of the cross. So to the extent that we are able to show people Jesus and to draw them to Jesus and introduce them to Jesus, that's what's going to bring people together. Yeah,
that's so good. And that's worth ending on, man. Thanks for putting a bow on that. Audience, I couldn't be more honored to have Aaron with us today. I mean, his stories and transparency and how real he's been on this show. I'm very grateful. And on behalf of the audience, I'm very thankful that you were able to share. And I know that there was somebody who got a little better today. Somebody got a little stronger in their faith today. Somebody got a different perspective on how this country can change today because of you. And I want to thank you for them. Audience, until next time, he's been Aaron Polsgrove. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed.